Good evening. I'm going to pose a question for you first. So we're calling to order this board policy forum on policy DJA, procurement, at 5:39 p.m. on 12/12/2019. The way the policy forums work, just so everyone knows, is we typically have a presentation from staff, and then we invite folks to come up and give us their public comment and their testimony. Because the notification went out, the meeting was originally scheduled to start at 6. How would you feel about presenting your testimony to us and then going to the presentation? Would that work? Just to give us a few more minutes for folks that might be rolling in? Okay. All right. So just background on this policy and why it is so important. We ask teachers to use every minute twice to be able to teach both math and social skills, both reading and organizational behaviors, both social studies and positive dispositions. As we look at the reality of funding in urban settings, the procurement policy is another way for also look at how we can use every dollar twice, and how we can really support the success of academics in schools with strategic planning around procurement. So that's our reason for having this conversation. That's some of the importance behind this policy and why we really, really want to get it right. So thanks all for being here. And so when we go through public comment, the way that has been our practice at these forums, especially when they're not super, super full, is to invite people to present for their 3 minutes. Then we'll do a hard stop at the end of your 3 minutes. But if you haven't finished your thoughts, your ideas, or other things percolate, you're welcome to come see Board Executive Gant and get added to the end of the list. Again, to come back up for another 3 minutes. And we'll cycle through that until we have a hard stop at 7. But my guess is we'll all have plenty of time to chat before that. Okay. We can certainly do that. So we'll just have, we'll set up the 3-minute timer. We don't have a 6-minute timer, so they'll just automatically re-up it. Is that good, guys? Excellent. All right. So with that, our first guests tonight, and I'm going to go with Mr. Livingston and Mr. Dash, if I say it like it's written. Say it again for me, sir. Dashio. Nice to meet you. Thank you both for being here. And so if you, there's a button on your, to turn it green.
Hey, look at that.
Dashio. Got that?
Thank you, sir.
All right. Well, I'll go. Since I was the first to sign in, I'll go first. And first, let me thank Christian Gant for who we met quite by happenstance, having lunch one day at a local establishment, for inviting me to offer some comments on the board's procurement regulations. I've had many issues over the years with the school, Baltimore City school system, and your regulations. For many years, I've practiced procurement law in the state of Maryland, as has my colleague, Mr. Livingston. In the city, most of that practice has been at the Board of Estimates, and some of your policies seem to have been derived from there, but for the most part, you follow the regulations set forth in COMAR, obviously. I'm going to go beyond, because I don't want you to hear the same old stuff. We'll talk about some changes that I would suggest or recommend in the policy, but I want to take a leap forward into where I think the future is going to go in the area of, particularly as it relates to small business procurement and minority business procurement, because I think we've lost our way. And I say that fully embracing minority business because I'm one of the architects of it. I wrote the original statute in the city. I was a founder of the original Minority Contractors Association. I've represented many minority firms over the years and represent many construction firms today, as, again, my colleague does. So I come to you with some background in this area. I'm going to suggest to you that two things. Number one, I suggest that after this forum is over, you give consideration to perhaps soliciting a task force that would more broadly get down in the weeds, if you will, and come up with some more definitive recommendations. But also, I would ask that you reconsider or think about what, as it relates to minority business, what are we intending to get from that? What's the end game? What are we trying to achieve? And I say that because, as it stands today, and as it is set forth in your regulation, everything turns on the issue of who owns and controls the controlling interest in the entity. And we're satisfied if that controlling interest is 51% in the hands of people who are eligible by virtue of their race or national origin or whatever the case may be. That standard pays little to no regard to the real benefit of having any business in a locality, which is who do they employ? Who works for the company? The goal of the program ought not in my mind, and this is after 40-some years of looking at it, not just to make one or two people who sit in the chair with the name president in front of it richer. It ought to be based upon the benefit that business has to the community as a whole. And to me, that's employment-based. So that, for example, if we have a small business program where the preference that would otherwise go to a minority business or whatever is based upon the extent to which across all of its job classifications it hires local residents, people who across all classes. I don't mean just as laborers, I don't mean just as cashiers, I don't mean just at the front door, I mean across the entire spectrum. If they are of underemployed and unemployed people, that's the kind of business that benefits the community. That's the kind of business that generates revenue, that generates income, that has to support families. Because as I've gotten older, which happens almost minute by minute, it have come to the opinion that ultimately it's the family unit itself that's in jeopardy. And you see it every day in your jobs. You see kids. I don't buy the concept of a broken home. What we have is broken relationships. What we have is broken relationships. And it doesn't, for example, it doesn't make any difference whether mom or dad is incarcerated or simply working the second or third job. The point is they're not home with the kids. The point is that unit, it can't function as it should, as we think it should, in the best interest of the children. And what causes that is the fact that mom or dad or both do not garner or are not paid sufficient income and wages and benefits so that they don't have to work 40, 80, and 60, or 80, and I guess 60, 80 is more than 60. 80, I did go to school, really. So that they have time to function as a family, which gets me back to the whole issue of employment and ultimately the fact that we've got to change also. We've got to put value on people as human beings and not attribute the entire value to what they do. Lawyers are not more valuable to society than sanitation workers. If you think they are, see what happened in New York when the sanitation workers went on strike. Call every doctor you want, but nobody could stop the rats from populating the city except the sanitation workers who had to pick the garbage up. So we have to change our whole way of thinking about people. We have to change our way of thinking about what businesses are benefiting the community as a whole. It is not, as I said when the city was considering Amazon and Jeff Bezos, I have nothing against Amazon, but we don't need more $10-hour jobs in a city where we know that $20 and $25 an hour is needed to support your family. It's like I often use the analogy of someone's 15 feet from shore drowning. We throw them a 12-foot rope and turn our back, and we're patting ourselves what good job we did, but if we turn around, we'll find that they're still underwater. People need to be compensated, people who are trying. And because what happens is when people come to the point where they lose hope. And as I moved to this city, and I've been in business in this city for over 45 years. I've been here a very, very long time. It's what I see too often in the eyes of people is desperation and a lack of hope.
So we're going to ask you to push pause there.
Yes.
And we'll give your 3 minutes to your colleague, even though you took 6. But, you're a kind human, so we'll.
All right, I'm done. I'll turn it
But
over.
then you're welcome to, we'll
Okay.
put it out to the audience, and then hear the presentation.
Now,
and then
Scott's
we'll
going to
invite
talk to you
back up
about
if
the
you'd like.
law. I'm a lawyer, but I don't do that.
All right, thank you. I appreciate your understanding.
Good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to be heard. My name is Scott Livingston. I was an assistant attorney general at a relatively young age, and that's when I met Bob DeShiel. He had a background in labor law and helped Perrin Mitchell come up with the phrase minority business enterprise and when it entered the lexicon of American law in 1978. And its purpose then was the thought, when there's a public works program to create jobs, gee, it turns out a lot of black kids in those days couldn't get jobs because there weren't very many black, because it was thought anyway, because of white racism against black kids. So that's at least what I thought. So we took the law and we went to the next step and said, well, from now on, we don't want the Maryland Department of Transportation to reinforce the lingering effects of past race discrimination by just awarding to the responsible bidder that submits a low responsive bid. I mean, that's nice, but these huge contracts for the then new subways would all go to big national firms, and the local subcontractors wouldn't get much out of it. And in particular, the minority business enterprise community that was just sort of burgeoning wouldn't get much. So we changed the laws and we established a 10% goal as an aspiration for prime contractors to subcontract out 10% to MBEs. It worked. It's been 40 years, so in one sense it stood the test of time. It's stale in some ways. The worst way is that, at least as of the last time I looked, X years ago, for the State Highway Administration, 72% of the work was done by the top 10% of my MBEs. And of the top 10% of MBEs, one was black, one or two was owned by a black man, one or two was owned by a Hispanic. But the bulk, 75% of that money, was involved with construction companies that were owned and controlled by white women. Well, I got nothing against white women. My mother's one. My wife's actually one. But the Civil War wasn't fought for that. And virtually all of them had a father or a cousin or an uncle or a husband who used to be in that business, and now he's a mere consultant. So the idea that a lot of MBE participation generates a lot of public good is at least controversial, and you ought to take a look at it. So on the procurement side, you got to tell me. So are these new regs that you're poised to? These are proposed, or these are the existing regs, and you want to revise them?
If you got it offline on our policy website, it's the proposal.
These are the proposals.
Oh, it is the existing. Okay, I'm sorry, it's the existing.
It's
I
existing.
lied.
Okay, so what's your function here tonight?
So our function here tonight is to get input from the community as the drafters of this policy are crafting it. Then the policy practice is it will be presented as a first reader when it's fleshed out to the public at a public board meeting. Or first it'll come to a policy committee meeting where we'll have more deeper dive once it's drafted. Then the policy committee provides feedback, welcomes public comment at that phase as well. From there, it'll go to first reader in front of the board, where there's a period of public comment after that. At second reader, the board can either vote to adopt or vote to move to a third reader. If we go to a third reader, then it's a third presentation in front of the community.
Are there particularly policy objectives that you look at this and say, this is really bad, we really want to go to the east, not the west, that you're trying to accomplish?
You might get some of these answers through the presentation. So
This presentation?
the one that's about to happen, yes.
Okay.
I don't know, but what we'll do is we will shift to the presentation, and then we can shift back to any follow-up questions.
Okay.
We'll start with other members of the audience and then go to you, Commissioner Frank.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question, at what point might we be able to ask questions of those who present?
So,
Those in the audience who are presenting?
yeah, absolutely. What I will do, because we're going to go to the presentation now, is we'll go to just a discussion afterwards. But otherwise, typically it happens during their testimony or right after. Okay? All right, so gentlemen, we're going to switch over to the presentation.
Should we move from here?
It'd be more pleasant, otherwise he has to sit on your lap.
I think that depends.
I'm moving.
Smart man, smart man.
Not my type.
Good evening. I'm Joe Vogel. I'm the Interim Director of Procurement.
Hi, I'm Michael Smith, MWBE consultant with Office of Legal Counsel.
What we'll do tonight is we're going to talk a lot about procurement, I guess, and then we're going to go then into the MBWBE. I'll be doing the procurement piece of it, and then Mike will take care of the MBWBE piece. Real quick, we'll do a quick general overview. We'll talk about K-12. We have a number of purchasing methods available to us. Quick about contracts, talk about the Procurement Review Committee, Procurement Policy DJA, the revision that we are talking about, recommending, and then we'll go into MBWBE. We have two processes at city schools that we purchase by. We have K-12 buy, and we have a P card. Basically, it's a procurement card. The K-12 buy is our e-commerce, and pretty much 99+% of our procurements run through the e-commerce. And we have a procurement card for pretty much one-off that most of the schools use. The flow chart on the right pretty much walks us through the process for requisition through invoice payment. First, a requisitioner enters a requisition in the K-12 buy, and what that process, the e-commerce system does is, first it makes sure that that person is authorized. It also checks the budget for the string. So if an individual is entering to buy books and they enter in a fund string that does not have enough funds in it, that requisition fails and does not go on. Once the system sees that there are funds, the requisition goes through an approval process. Again, at any point of that approval process, if someone decides not to approve it, the rec fails and goes back to the requisitioner. Once the requisition has been approved, it gets to procurement. And at that point, the buyer then processes that rec following city schools regulations. Purchase order is issued, it's sent to the vendor. The vendor then either ships the product or performs a service. Once the service or products are completed, then the requisition goes back into K-12 and enters the receipt. In the meantime, the invoice is being sent from the vendor to city schools. That invoice is entered in to the system, and as long as the invoice matches the purchase order and there's a receipt, then the invoice is paid. We have a number of procurement methods that are available to us. They are small procurements, anything $50,000 and under. We have two competitive sealed bids and proposals, anything over $50,000. We have a sole source and exceptions, emergency procurements, piggyback, and pre-qualification selection. Within the small procurements, anything $10,000 and under requires a quote from one vendor, at least. And then anything between 50 and 10, we require a quote from at least two vendors. Vendors that do not have a board-approved contract, they're limited to $50,000 per year. The first item after that is invitation for bids. They're competitive sealed bidding. We advertise all of our solicitations on the Maryland State website. It's called eMaryland Market Advantage. We call her Emma. We typically have a pre-bid conference. That bid conference is attended by interested vendors. If there's MBE participation, then the MBE liaison, as well as the using department and procurement. In the IFB, bids are open publicly, and we read off the prices, and typically the low bid gets it. In an IFB, all vendors that meet the qualifications are considered equal in a technical respect, and then the low guy gets it. And then, assuming it's over $50,000, a board letter is prepared and is brought to you, the board, for approval. We also have competitive sealed proposals or requests for proposals. Again, we also advertise on EMMA. We typically have a pre-bid proposal. Here is where it differs a little bit from the IFB in that there are two components to an RFP, both technical and financial. We develop an evaluation committee, and they review all proposals received technically only. We don't even open the financials. So in that technical process, there may be clarifications to vendors. We may ask them to come in and perform oral presentations. Once the evaluation committee finishes their technical evaluation, they then rank as 1 being the best to the city schools, 2, 3, 4, 5 to, let's say, the worst. Only when that's completed, then we open up the financials. That's real easy to rank. Low guy's number one, and it goes up from there. At that point, the evaluation committee looks at both the financial and the technical evaluation, and they pick the best choice for city schools. And at that,
Sorry.
oh,
Mr.
go ahead.
President.
Nice. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so just a question.
Yes.
Specific to sort of bullet 2 and then the bigger picture of MWE.
Yes.
Do we advertise elsewhere? Do we ever do like a constant contact of prior vendors or potential vendors? I'm just thinking about like capacity. If you're truly a small business, you have a very different capacity to monitor a website for requests for proposals.
Yep. What we do is we advertise both on EMM, and I didn't say it here, we also advertise on our site. When we do our outreaches, as people come up to us, we tell them that definitely to register on email and marketplace. We give them the site, we tell them where to go, but pretty much that's all that we do advertise just on the email and marketplace, correct?
No instances of reaching out to companies and saying, hey, we're doing this.
Only if the end user has somebody in mind that they know of. We make sure we tell them then that yes, go out to email and marketplace, but we do not have an outreach for that, correct?
Okay. And, I'm sorry, Commissioner Frank.
That's fine. So this is a part of a question I'll ask later on, but to follow up on the chair, are there any services that are offered to minority and local vendors to help them prepare for bidding with an institution like the school district? Are there vendor fairs? Are there classes? Do you bring in third-party nonprofits that might help prepare small minority businesses for what it takes to actually bid on schoolwork?
Yes, the Governor's Office of Minority Affairs, GOMA, NANS, called Governor's Office of Small and Minority Business Affairs. They offer classes on a regular basis.
But is that in conjunction with the school, or those are classes available to anyone who might be applying to
That's separate
government?
from the school.
Or that's just for the Baltimore City Public Schools?
No, it's not for the Baltimore City Public. It's open to the general public.
And
classes.
what is the curriculum that they're receiving there?
They do training as far as how to bid on contracts, how to access funding from the state of Maryland or local governments. They do training such as that.
And you think the question is, that's transferable between state of Maryland or local government?
Yes, they don't limit it to the state of Maryland.
Right.
They also offer classes in the city of Baltimore as well, offers classes and training programs. It's twice a year they do it in the city of Baltimore.
Is there a distinction between what a small business needs to learn to maximize their opportunities to bid on a Baltimore City contract versus a school district contract, or would you suggest that it's pretty much the same set of skills that are necessary?
It's pretty much the same set of skills that are necessary. Again, what we do here, we do depend on the source of the funding. It could be state regulations that we're dealing with and goals associated with it, or if the source of the funding is Baltimore City, then it's different regulations.
So my last question, sorry. So you're saying if there were a company out there who wanted to learn how to become a vendor to Baltimore City schools, there are already sufficient resources out there through one that you identified, potentially through the city, that exists that would allow that company to learn about what it means to be a vendor for the school district.
Sufficient, I don't know whether I would say they're sufficient, but there are opportunities available.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Lynn?
And just to piggyback off of what Commissioner Frank was saying, so for the programs that are for City Hall or the City of Baltimore, do we have a percentage of how many of those small businesses from that program, or any way that we can get those and try cross-reference how many of those small businesses have kind of come over to our school district to see if they're able to be a part of this bidding process, or if not, are we able to see that to kind of see like if we're really being open to all of our options within like the city of Baltimore and like options with like small businesses?
Right now, there's nothing available that we can do, but I'm sure I can reach out to the Baltimore City office and maybe we can even assist them also in presenting the spend for Baltimore City Public Schools, how it could benefit. We do that often at outreaches, and we make ourselves available, throughout the year, telling them about, the bid openings and potential forecasting tools and things of that nature. we'll do that throughout the year.
Thanks.
We have these pre-bids and pre-proposal conferences. When there's a MBE participation goal in there, Mike shows up to those, and Mike offers his assistance, and we tell bidders, proposers, if they have any questions, call him directly, and frequently Mike will review what they're going to submit to make sure they're on the right track. So maybe that's what you're also referring to.
So you used an interesting article there. You said if there's an MWE requirement.
Correct.
Can you sort of state within a policy why we wouldn't pretty consistently have an MWE requirement? Is it capacity? Is it a piggybacking thing? Is it?
Yeah, there are exceptions, just like you said. It could be, are there MBEs available in a particular area? You know, sometimes with like if it's a publishing contract or a training contract, it could be limited to that one individual, at which time there would not be a goal set for MBE participation. And obviously, sometimes with the piggyback contracts, there are no goal sets for MBE participation as well.
So one of the things we might want to consider thinking about as a committee, and this is me, I haven't talked to them yet, is making it policy that we included in the RFP that it's expected, but then going with an exceptions only if we didn't get submissions, or, you know, rather than saying on the onset, we don't know there's publishers, because there may be publishers, but they might be in West Virginia, or they might be in Pennsylvania that
Yes.
might be able to accommodate the need. Commissioner Frank? Oh, you're good? Okay. Okay. So we'll turn it back over.
Okay, we also have an emergency procurement process. And let me read you what it says rather than just expect to remember it. The emergency procurement must be limited to procurements of only the items and quantities necessary to avoid or mitigate serious public health, safety, and welfare, or to prevent the disruption or interference with the education programs of city schools. So what that really says is, if we have an emergency, we can't do a 2-year contract. If we have an emergency and we have to repair a roof, we can't repair 5 roofs, is basically what that says. The emergencies are very rare. When they do occur, we need the approval and the signature of the CEO. Once we get that, we go ahead and we take care of the emergency. We then also prepare a board letter and bring it back to the board to let them know what we did. We also have a sole source procurement, and that's when we truly only have, there's only one vendor that has the unique capability of requiring to fulfill our needs. One of the easiest examples is we are an Oracle shop, where only Oracle can work on their software system, so that would be a sole source. There are some exceptions, and that's the materials of instructions, and that's defined by the Maryland Federal Financial Reporting Manual. It's when a director determines that the product or service is only available from one source, and if the CEO directs so. You heard about a piggyback. We are allowed to use contracts from other LEAs, other states, other cooperative procurement agencies, as long as that process was a competitive solicitation. So you'll see in some of the board letters that we bring to you, we say that we're asking approval to use a piggyback contract.
A quick comment on that, and maybe it can be discussed later. There are advantages to piggyback contracts, I guess, for the local school district in that the bidding has been done. It procures a service that we need, and it's a more direct.
Quicker.
Yeah. But most of the ones that I have seen that have gone through the operations committee are piggybacking on jurisdictions that may not have the same MWBE requirements that we have.
That's correct.
So in sort of serving one purpose, which is a more efficient and direct way to procure, we're also sort of we're giving up on another important goal in our procurement process. So what limits are there on opting for piggybacks over the more traditional direct procurement that we typically do that does open our process to minority and women?
Yep, I'm not sure of the question exactly. I can tell you most of the piggyback contracts that I have seen since I've been here, the vast majority do not include MBE, WB as a requirement.
Right, so
And
my
why I
question
don't know.
is, just to take it to its illogical extreme, we could say as a way of, quote, avoiding the local process of bidding and MBE, WB, and other things to go along with that, why don't we just do more piggybacking? So how do we keep from going in the direction of doing piggybacking that don't come with MWE participation goals at the sort of consequence of giving up the local procurement that we do that does come with those goals? How do we limit piggybacking so that it doesn't I
I got-
obviate the need to do
Okay,
local
yep,
bidding.
I got you. Well, not sure. We can probably talk about that offline. I'm not sure. Again, most of the contracts we've seen do not include an MBE participation goal. And whether or not we should stop using piggybacks and solicit more, maybe is that what your question is then, sir?
Yeah, I didn't know if
Okay,
there's any policy that basis
There is not
for when we do or don't use piggyback.
No, there is not right now. And then the last is a pre-qualification of school program providers. This is pretty much somewhat like an RFP in that we do go out, we do advertise again on the Maryland Marketplace, and these are programs that are for the school, and in particular, professional development. They're providers to the staff, and in extended learning, they're providers to the students. We pretty much limit this to educational programs. We have several different types of contracts, construction, professional service agreements. We do have something called an MOU. It's a form of a contract that does not require city schools to expend any funds. We have a fair amount of those. We also have something called a Procurement Review Committee. All of the board letters that we bring to you, the board, go through a review from the committee. We have members that consist of pretty much all of the major offices, the executive, financial, operating, academic, and then, of course, legal is there. Once the board letters are approved by the PRC, then we put that on the next board member. And, of course, all board letters do go to either the teaching and learning or the operations subcommittees. Now, here is
All members of that committee, Mr. Vogel, are internal?
I'm sorry, pardon me?
All members of that committee are internal?
Yes, they are, ma'am, yes. Mhm. Now, this is the policy suggestion addition that we are talking about. It is one item. We currently have, A, B, C, and we are looking to recommending to add D. And let me read that to you. D says, the board shall comply with federal laws and regulations, including with that limitation, the Education Department's General Administrative Regulations. It's called EDGAR, governing the use of federal funding for procurements for Baltimore City Public Schools. And whenever we procure goods with federal funds, we are supposed to obey by these laws, these regulations, excuse me. If we don't, we suffer the chance of losing those funds. The EDGAR consists of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages. It's rather big. Among other things, though, as far as we're concerned with this procurement, they govern the manner of selecting vendors, the competitive solicitations that we do, the contents of the contract. They look for, there's a representation in there that vendors are not engaged in bribery, and then, of course, there's an auditing requirement. EDGAR states that we have to use, or districts have got to use the most restrictive procurement method. Here's a quick example of what we are doing here. Expenditures 0 to 10,000, EDGAR requires a quote from one vendor, so does city schools. Anything between 10 and 50,000 expenditure, EDGAR requires a quote from two vendors, so does city schools. Anything 50 or anything above 50, EDGAR still only requires a quote from two vendors. We at city schools then go to a formal competitive process. And then with EDGAR, anything over 150, that's when EDGAR picks up the formal competitive process, and so do we. So right now, we are using the most competitive, the most restrictive method, and that's us, city schools. And EDGAR also requires that we follow the same procedures for both grants and general funds. We do. We're supposed to award to the most responsible vendors. We do that also. We're supposed to maintain records for the history of procurement. And then they state that all procurements must provide full and open competition. Real or perceived unfair advantages must be avoided. We certainly have that in our regulations also. So that's real quick. That's a high-level view of procurement. So next, Mike can go into the MBE, WBE program.
Good evening, everybody. Again, thank you for inviting us to talk about the MBE program. I get excited when I get a chance to talk about it, whether it's in this forum or other forums throughout the city and the state. Again, the Minority and Women Business Enterprise Department was established to implement the board's MWBE program. The goal of the program is to provide maximum opportunity for minorities and women to participate in the board's procurement program. The department is responsible for establishing MBE goals and sub-goals, participating in pre-bid and pre-proposal meetings, evaluating bids in compliance with goals, monitoring projects via site visits, desk audits, and compliance reviews, and serving as an informed mediator in any disputes that might occur between a prime contractor and a MBE/WBE subcontractor. Also providing annual MBE reports to the CEO and the Board of State Construction Program. And additionally, we do outreach throughout the year to talk to, meet, and tell people, small businesses, about opportunities that exist within Baltimore City Public Schools. Because a lot of vendors think it's all part of Baltimore City. They're not aware of the opportunities that exist with Baltimore City Public Schools. So whenever we have that opportunity to share that with them and tell them to look at us and what opportunities exist here at public schools, we take advantage of that as well. City schools is required to comply with two different MWBE programs, the City of Baltimore and the State of Maryland, depending on where the majority of the funds are received from. When applicable, the overall MBD goals, the sub-goals, are set for each project. Generally, the following factors are taken into consideration: the extent to which the work can be reasonably segmented to allow for MWBE participation, the number of certified MBEs potentially could perform the identified work, the geographic location of the MBE, review of the annual contract dollars associated with the project, and information obtained from other LEAs related to establishing MWBE goals or subcontracting goals for similar projects and procurements. What we do sometimes, we'll reach out to other LEAs in Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, to find out if they were successful in achieving a bid on different types of contracts. Particularly something where we had waivers in the past. We try to look at it and see how other jurisdictions have done it as well and find out how we can do things differently here. If a determination is made by the MBE goal does not apply, no goals will be assigned. This is not considered a waiver, just a determination which excludes the MWBE goal assignment process from the project or procurement process. Waivers are only applied if requested by the bidders when submitting proposals to procurement. Projects city-funded program. The projects consist of both professional services, contracts, construction, and rehabilitation projects. With some exceptions, MWBE goals are set on all procurement projects of $50,000 or more. Goals do not apply to contracts under $50,000. Baltimore City goals are 27% for MBEs and 10% for WBEs. MBE firms participating as prime subcontractor must be certified by Baltimore City's Minority and Women Business Opportunities Office. The state-funded program. Projects are typically construction-based, rehabilitation projects within existing structures and new construction under the 21st Century Building Plan. State regulations require the inclusion of MBE goals on procurement projects in excess of $50,000. Goals do not apply to contracts under $50,000. There's an annual aspirational goal of at least 29% for MBEs. The state Maryland sub-goals on construction projects totaling $200,000 or more are for African-American firms 7% and Asian-American firms 4%. MBE firms participating as prime subcontractors must be certified with the Maryland Department of Transportation Office of Minority Business Enterprise. That concludes my brief presentation.
All right, any questions? Commissioner Frank, Commissioner Shinya?
Thank you. That was really helpful and informative to see it presented like that and written out. Do we have at the end of a fiscal year a total amount of contracts that were awarded to minority and women-owned vendors or companies?
I don't have the total number with me.
Do we keep that as a measure in terms of how much of our spending was awarded to minority, women-owned, or women-owned companies?
Yes, we do keep that. I don't have that with me today, but I can get that
Yeah,
information to you.
that'd be helpful.
I have the dollar amounts associated with awarded to MBEs. I have those amounts.
So when as part of this policy, one of the things that I would like to have considered as one of the regulations is even though we don't have an MWE percentage requirement for the lesser dollars, including an end report from, say, maybe, I don't know, some random number, 25,000, 10,000 to 50,000, because I can see spaces where it may be the smaller businesses, the smaller contracts, that may be more readily able to access and integrate with local providers. So while I'm not saying we should necessarily put a requirement on those smaller procurement items, but including that in the compliance report at the end, I think would be valuable.
Okay.
Back to you, Commissioner Frank.
What are some of the conditions that would cause us to give a vendor a waiver from the requirements of participation?
Sometimes we look at the actual scope of services, like I mentioned earlier, if it's something, this is something unique that's only coming from one person or one individual, if it's a publisher or things of that nature.
So the waiver comes before we issue the RFP or after?
The waiver actually comes after, you know.
So we would have made a determination before the bid that this project can't be segmented or there's only one vendor in the region. At that point, we would exclude, what would we say in the RFP, that the waiver, the MBW requirements on that
Yeah.
contract are waived?
Yeah,
Because
we look at it at the beginning. If it comes down that
Right.
we realize at the beginning that there are no MDE goals associated with it. That happened to, I think it was 22 times the last fiscal year, 22 times.
The last thing I'll say is more just a comment. I think, given the amount of money we spend a year on operating and to some degree capital, to the extent that we have minority and women-owned bidders on construction, I think at $1.3 billion, we're probably one of the largest businesses in Baltimore. And going back like 10 or 15 years, the universities and the hospitals in Baltimore, for a variety of reasons, some of it were in their own self-interest and others, they decided to do it because they felt like it was the right thing to do in the city of Baltimore. And they imposed goals upon themselves in the areas of purchasing, construction, and hiring. And they set goals that they weren't required to set because they weren't part of any government entity, but they did so anyway. And the result of that was that more, particularly African-American companies in Baltimore, had access to work within the institutions. And I think we all know that African-American companies generally hire African-Americans more than white-owned companies, and that many of these employees were living in Baltimore City. So there was a direct benefit to the companies, to the institutions, and the city of Baltimore by these businesses and institutions making an intentional decision to act in a certain way which they thought would benefit the city of Baltimore, by building wealth in the African-American community, by building wealth in the women WBE community, and by being purposeful in its policies and practices to expand more opportunity to these businesses. And the reason I bring that up is because the school district is in many ways like any business in the city. And right now, my sense is, of course, its core mission under Dr. Santelises are our kids and their families, and to support the teachers and the work that they do in producing outcomes with our kids. But there are collateral benefits and obligations that I think we have as a school district, and that is that we should look at what universities and hospitals and businesses in Baltimore are doing above and beyond what their own particular missions are, to see how the way we spend our money can produce even more and better outcomes for minority-owned and women-owned businesses in the city. Because I think we're all better for it. Families that have more wealth will stay in the city, they'll have kids in the city, they'll send their kids to our schools, we'll get more per pupil allocation from the state, and the city becomes more healthy in the process. And so there's a whole slew of things that have been done that we could learn about. Everything from vendor fairs to other things that I would suggest as we think about a procurement policy, we think about ways to sort of to move in that direction. But at the time, when we can do so without distraction from our most important mission, Dr. Santelises, which is the mission you have for our kids. But I would suggest the first step would be to learn more about it and to see what others have done, and then to see maybe on a pilot basis what we could do within the school district to take some of those steps towards having these collateral benefits of a more intentional procurement.
All right, then with that, we will move back to public comment. We'll start with if there's anyone who hasn't presented that would like to present with us, and then we'll circle back to anyone who has and would like to chat. And at this point, when people are chatting, we can go back and forth as much as needed. So, are you interested? No? Okay. Gentlemen, then if you'd like to come back up, together seem to work well for you all, or you can take turns, whatever works for you. And again, I appreciate your understanding the need for structure, just simply so that when we do have a policy that is incredibly controversial and the room is full, we can rely on this is our way of doing business. So appreciate the flexibility.
Oh, that's fine. Some years ago, I was a member of the Board of Education of Baltimore County, and I can tell you that this is a much more efficient way of going about business than when I was around. And I would also say that to the extent that anyone suggests that the county's operation is more efficient than what goes on here, I can tell you, I sat there, and that just ain't so. But it's just not.
We are doing our fiduciary duty and our responsibility, and we didn't pay you to say that. Thank you.
No, you know what? I'll tell you. This is as an aside. It was in 1995, I think it was. Schaefer was governor. It was his first term, and Baltimore County didn't vote for him. And I did work for the city for many. I was special counsel to the finance department and so forth. And in fact, I told someone that one of my clients actually built this building, this headquarters building, years ago.
It's a shared client.
Yeah. But in any event, I was at the so Baltimore County didn't vote for then Governor Schaefer. I was at the gym one morning. I got a call from the governor's appointment secretary saying, "Would you like to be on the county board of education?" I said, "I don't know." Well, okay, you got it. Well, that was his way of punishing Baltimore County for not voting for him. So because first thing I got there, I said, we don't have secret meetings anymore. If you say it in front of me, I'm going to tell. You don't have to do an investigation. We don't keep secrets from people that we work for, and we work for the people. So that's just my way of approaching things.
And when you're doing the right
but
thing,
I did not get a second term.
Right.
But I should
There
add
you go.
that.
All right.
But in any event, if I want to touch upon a couple of things before I turn the mic back over to Scott, a couple of things that came out of Mr. Vogel's presentation and some of the MBE stuff. First, with respect to RFP, I would suggest that you seriously consider a simple pass-fail system of evaluating proposals. I know that people will give you the impression that by coming up with some scoring mechanism that it's really objective. It really isn't. The fact of the matter is somebody subjectively decides what score is going to be attached to what item. Somebody subjectively decides what item is going to be credited among the list of things that you're going to evaluate. I suggest you go to simple pass-fail because I've seen on the city side, not here, I've seen the city under this RFP system award contracts, particularly in the IT area, and that's a very sensitive area. I heard somebody say about Oracle. And the fact that you're locked in, I think I heard someone say Oracle, and the fact that you're locked in. There's probably no area in procurement anywhere in the world where there's more cost overruns and more escalation of fees and costs other than IT. And if I'm wrong about you, then God bless you. But everything I've seen, that's if you're going to single out one, that's where it is. So I've seen Baltimore City award contracts for millions of dollars more because the score, one company scored 85 and the other company scored 80. And if you ask what measurable difference is there in the quality of the proposal between 80 and 85, all they can say is 85 is higher number than 80. It makes no sense. So I'm going to suggest, and that's the other thing, in all of your procurement, make sure common sense stays in the room. Don't ever lock common sense out of the room.
So Commissioner Frank has a question.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And by the way, Commissioner Frank, how are you? I know we go way back. On the area of MBE, I suggest that you consider the structural barriers that there are to small and minority businesses participating. By structural barriers, I'm talking about requirements for bonding and other things. The fact of the matter, unfortunately, the minority business program, as it's been applied over the years, has been pretty much restricted to subcontracting. It's viewed as a subcontracting program. It was never intended as such. The presumption was that small and minority firms lacked the necessary technical or financial resources to participate at the same level, but that's not true in every case. So that what we need to do to overall increase minority and small business participation is to eliminate the barriers that allow them so that more of them can participate and bid at the prime contracting level for opportunities. That almost every jurisdiction, and I can say that with some degree of authority because I wrote a lot of these programs around the country, including in Maryland and in Baltimore City.
Excuse me.
I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Shields, I do have a question on that.
Yeah.
I never understood it when I was at the city why minority primes were not counted in the participation goal. I've heard both sides of it. I don't know if you know, or maybe our folks do. Do we count minority primes in the participation goal, or like the city, do we not count them?
We do count
Okay.
50% of any, they can, if it's the MBE goal, they can self-perform 50% of their goal.
As a prime?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's a fairly new phenomenon. I remember when it was adopted by the state, I'd say about 5 years ago, but actually it reversed itself. In the beginning, a firm bidding as a minority firm bidding as a prime, if they were low bidder, it was a low bidder, provided you performed a certain amount of the work with your own workforce. In Baltimore City, a prime contractor in construction always had to do 51% with its own workforce anyway. So that was pretty much ensured. And then at some point later on, as Scott would say, the tables got turned and the requirement for subcontracting to other firms was imposed even on minority firms under some theory. But I'm not sure what the theory was. But I'm glad to say that we finally reversed it because what you said, Commissioner Frank, is true. The fact of the matter is that minority firms hire more minority people than non-minority firms. And so that in and of itself, in my estimation, is a grounds that it's not required that they be treated the same as non-minority firms. But I'm going to stop. I don't want to eat up all the time again because I could go on for.
Well, Bob and I have only been discussing this since 1977. That's 42 years.
Yeah.
Right. Bob had an afro that he couldn't have gotten through the front door. And I had a handlebar mustache, and neither of us had wives. We've been beaten down. We used to be each 6'11". Sad. Okay, so I heard a half dozen questions and comments, and it doesn't take me long to respond to each one. The first one I'm going to knock off is the last one you discussed. I personally am the author of the policy at Maryland Department of Transportation, which got picked up by the feds and has migrated across the country, of the rule that, look, when people or when entities are competing for a prime contract, they should be on equal footing. Equal footing. So if an MBE is a low bidder, great. It should subcontract out X percent to MBE subs, and if a non-MBE gets it, it should do the same thing. Because I thought that especially when you have federal funds, it was tricky to have some prime contractors competing on something other than equal footing. Bob and I disagreed, but that, like I said, that's only been since 1978. So I want to go over the half dozen questions that each of you all asked if you really want to hear the answers. And if you don't, that's fine. Okay, first, the
Yeah, I'm gonna
outreach.
invite Commissioner Frank to take his leave because he needs to be elsewhere, but I think.
Well, so I won't answer your
Commissioner Lynn,
questions.
We already want to hear him, yeah.
Lucky guy. Okay, the commissioner asked about outreach. In 1978, it was a state of the art to require prime contract to get state agencies to have pre-bid conferences and pre-proposal conferences, and it was, I don't know if it was mine or his bright idea, that there should be a lot of these conferences because it would allow African American entrepreneurs to come meet their potential customer, and that would over time break down those barriers that, thanks to historical crimes. MBEs or black guys didn't know so many white guys. It was just that simple. Turning now to 2018 or 19, I'm speculating that guys, especially his age, they don't need to go to meetings. Just got to get on Skype and say hello. So it was an old-fashioned thing that was pretty smart at the time it came out, but now it's brute and stammering. Take a look at it. So I don't. And State Highway Administration, which spends a lot more than $1 billion that you all spend, doesn't have any pre-bid meetings anymore. The same people would come to each one, so they don't need those. They don't really act. They don't function like you wanted to. The state of Maryland prohibits having mandatory pre-proposal or pre-bid meetings. They can only be voluntary. And if a person wants to pretend that he's helping out the MBE community, he sends some entry-level guy to go attend the meeting on behalf of the big company, so he can say, oh, yeah, we went to all those meetings, and that's treated as evidence of good faith efforts to achieve the MBE goals. But it's good faith, but it's really phony. The next one is on advertising. So you don't need to reach out to MBEs or anybody else to say, hey, we have a big new contract opportunity. If the person isn't aware of it by going on what used to be called e-Maryland Marketplace, that person's not going to be in business long anyway. But here's an alternative way. For X dollars, a person can sign up with a bidding, BIDDING service, and there are a bunch of them. The biggest one I think is called Deltech, DELTECH. And you pay, I don't know, $1,000 a year, and every time there is a municipal contract out for bid to provide high-mast lighting or line striping or median strips, landscape. Everything you can think of, a vendor to come in and do updating of software for Oracle or something. You can just pay the service X dollars, and they sift through all of the opportunities across probably the world, but certainly the country. Say, hey, here are the upcoming opportunities. And you could do that for projects that are under 100,000 or 50,000 or whatever you wanted. That's how an efficient entrepreneur who doesn't have extra time to spend coming to meetings that are, it takes more time to park than you'll ever make any money back on it. But if you're new to the business, it's one thing if your dad or granddad started the company and inherited it. That's easy. But if you're new to it, which is the case of a lot of MBEs, I don't know how you learn that. You can call Bob or Scott. Anyway, the next one is piggybacking an MBE. He was correct that every time you decide to purchase something piggyback based on an intergovernmental cooperative purchasing clause, that means that whatever are the requirements of that other, like the state of Utah did this, and it means that the MBE programs that we have here are not implemented. So you have to decide what you want to do, and it's a matter of balance. So 3 years ago, the Maryland Department of Information Technology needed an enterprise, you're going to know this better than me, enterprise platform such and such software program. And instead of putting it out for a competitive sealed proposal here in the state, it just went to Utah, which had a similar contract with a big, huge company. I mean, really huge. I don't know how big Deloitte is. It's got to be $10 billion a year, every bit of it. And bought a $150 million software update program. Well, there was no MBE requirement on that because he bought it from off that consortium that got the intergovernmental cooperative purchasing clause. But you have to balance that. You can decide, well, we want to take the time and the energy and maybe extra cost to have a competition here, or we'll just buy it from the other guy and then custom, negotiate a custom contract to suit the exact needs of Maryland DOT. Do it, rather. The next one, pre-qualification. Bob was the chairman of the committee that set up pre-qualification. If you really have any questions about it, ask him. I'm at Baltimore City pre-qual. I don't know if the Board of Education has pre-qual.
They do.
They do? Were you the chairman of that too?
No.
Okay. All right. Somebody wanted to know about reports of denials of waivers. There are a lot of reasons for granting a waiver, and the traditional one is the person makes a good faith effort to get MBE participation, and the prime contractor sends out an email nowadays to 200 people who are MBEs certified for the code, the national, what's NAICS stand for? North American Industrial Code System, who's certified to provide, well, an easy one would be IT training to train people who want to use IT programs. And if that person, well, let me start over. Suppose that's what the only contract, if the contract is only for training, and there aren't any trainers who are MBEs, but then, or then you find that there are a bunch of MBEs who are certified in that particular thing. So my contractor clients, the prime contractors, they send out an email, hey, by the way, we have an upcoming opportunity, please give us a quote. 99% of those are not opened, much less responded to. But if you want to show alleged good faith efforts, like prime contractors want, you send it out to everybody, you send it out again. You have somebody on your staff call up and say, hi, it's Mr. So-and-so now. Of course he's not here, he's out on the job doing some work. All right, and that proves that you've achieved good faith efforts of trying to get MBEs. And some of that's because MBEs are new and they can't call up their old friend who's the owner of the company. That was one of the big ideas in 1978. All right, the next one is you don't have records. Your records are crummy. I mean, I'm sure they're great for what they're doing, but they usually only show where there's a grant of a waiver. How about the denials of a grant of a waiver? How about and you break it down, you sort it a little bit. So usually before a big $50 million construction project comes out, a procurement review committee in the state, that's the state's parlance, not yours, says, well, how much opportunity is there for MBEs? I'm going to give you an example where there was zero. I represented the largest slot machine manufacturer in the world. It provided slot machines to the state of Maryland for the casinos. There's no opportunity for MBE participation in the manufacture of those pieces of equipment. There's a supply chain a mile long that's been established for many years, and they're not ever going to have, well, there's a local guy who's really brilliant. Let him install some portion of the equipment. And we're not doing that. That can't happen. But my other clients that operate facilities, like the venue, the Horseshoe one, well, there's opportunity. It's a big building, so you got to have machines break down, so you can send somebody out and fix it, and that could be an MBE. A lot of things like that, and we had it there. All right, the next one is, you don't have a decent system for bid protests. That means if a protester has a legitimate protest and brings it to Baltimore City Public Schools and gets wrongfully denied, what's he do about it? Well, the one thing he doesn't do is have a neutral, independent forum for resolution of that bid protest. And if there was a neutral forum for resolution of the bid protest, then it would be expressed in writing, and you could actually read, oh, if we do so-and-so, then here's the result. I'm going to give you an easier one. This is for that young man right there. Excuse me, young man. You ready? Okay. So bids were due to be opened at noon on June 1st in Baltimore City School Board for a $10 million contract. And when they say it has to be opened at that time, if you come a minute late, you're dead. So my client, stupidly enough, got there with 1 or 2 minutes left. We came into the building, and there was all a bunch of painting and scaffolding. You couldn't get in. So the guard said, well, go around to the side door. So we did. By this time, it's no longer 1 minute. It's like really 10 seconds. We come back because it wasn't open. He said, I'm at the other door. All right, well, now we're 2 minutes late due to the negligence of the guy who was sitting out there in the front.
Or just getting here late.
That's something he knows a lot about. You should listen to him on that. So the point is that you belong to the school of thought that says it's okay to be 2 minutes late if it's the fault of the government. You may be of the school of thought that says, oh no, if he's late, he's late. I don't know what your position is, but I know this. It's Baltimore City Public Schools. It could have one position on Monday and another on Tuesday. And how do you know which way the bureaucrat's going to go? You don't. So my clients don't compete vigorously for these contracts.
Would there be a conflict of interest if that due process was housed under the external procurement review committee members? If we had some outside support and participation on that committee? So I asked earlier who the review committee was, if we had any off-campus sort of folks. If we were to add a couple off-campus, could that due process on reviews be housed there, or would that be conflict of interest and we need another body, or how?
It's a cheaper, better, faster way. You got like 23 different LEAs. They all have bidding. They all have potential for protests. Each of them decides to do things in their own way. So in Kent County, it doesn't matter what you are. Unless your great-grandfather was a slaveholder down there, you're not going to get a contract. That's how it works in Kent County. But if you could all get together and have a neutral board like the Maryland State Board of Contract Appeals, then that would produce a body of law that would guide people, or bidders, and possibly enhance competition.
The answer is you could create a body that would be a board of appeals or whatever you might want to call it to handle bid protest. And that body could be comprised of non-system employees in the same way that the school board itself is comprised of non-employees of the school system. Some legislative action will probably be required to do that, I think. I don't know of anything in the law that prohibits it, but generally, if it's not expressly authorized, the view is that you've got to get some legislation to permit it. But yes, I think that could be done. But I want to touch on two things real quickly, and this is my last two comments.
So I'm going to actually put pause really quickly, and just for a time check, because we have a hard stop in 15 minutes.
Okay.
I'm going to throw it back out here to see if there's anybody at this table that has questions for you or comments, and then let you wrap up. Okay.
Well, I didn't have a question, but just a comment. So, our current process, we have for all bid protests, the board has the final vote, and we also have an independent hearing examiner to look at them. So there is an independent eye who looks over.
How many bid protests have prevailed? Exactly. And with
I don't have the
respect to
statistics
the
offhand.
instances where some person was shy of perfect, a public school official, how do you hold them accountable? How do you at least teach them they're supposed to do it to the east, not the west? You don't have that. And one way you can find out is you can ask the chefs at a restaurant, how good is the food? Or you can ask the diners, and you may find a different thing. And you all don't ever ask the diners. I mean, we're about as close as you get because we represent consumers of your services.
Well, I would say this is kind of ask the diners, right? At least tonight, but
Yeah. Yeah. I want to Christian, you done? I want to. Okay. 2 points, because someone mentioned, I think it was Mr. Smith, talked about having different outcomes based upon funding sources, which I generally disagree with. You, as a school board, ought to decide what's in your best interest, and if that does not appear to be consistent with some other funding source, there's nothing that prevents you from going to that source and getting approval for your way of doing things. It happens all the time. In other words, if because the higher up federal mandates typically don't take into account adequately local necessities. I mean, this is where the rubber meets the road here. So if you've got a program that you think is best for your community, my suggestion is, and I say this to the city all the time, don't just say, well, the state has different requirements, so we got to follow the state. State doesn't care in most cases. They're saying that because nobody asked them. Nobody went to them and said, hey, can we use our requirements here instead of yours because ours are better suited for us? In most cases, when you do that, they say, sure, we don't care, as long as it's consistent with the same overall objective. But nobody asked them because it's easier to just follow somebody else and just go along with the program. That's one thing. The other thing is, and I'm going to quit, and you already know this, the goal of government, you don't waste taxpayer money, but it is not necessarily in your best interest or in the government's best interest always to award to the lowest bidder. That is not the true measure of the best outcome. It's not, because you have other interests. There are times when your goals and objectives will cost more than what a low bidder would offer. But they're your goals. You know what I mean? Low bid. I could tell you, for example, that the correlation between the bid amount and the actual payment amount at the end of the contract is almost never the same. On any contract, it's never the same. All the bidding does is eliminate other people that you don't have to deal with anymore once the bids are open. That's all it does. Let's be real about this. You require surety bonds. When's the last time anybody collected on one? Never. Surety companies don't pay on their bonds. They go out and hire other contractors to come in and finish the work, and they charge the cost back to the original principal. So that's what I mean. Common sense has to be in the room, and it has to govern. The rules are there to allow us to get to appropriate and fair and equitable outcome. They're not there to create a vacuum where we stick our head in the sand and pretend we don't know what's really going on. And I'm finished. Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Shinya, anything to add or questions?
I'm gonna, the last statement you made in terms of making decisions, I would agree with you, and I will say that my understanding and my time with the board is we have made decisions, just as you've said, where it has not always been the lowest bidder. And actually have had some bid protests around those decisions. But I must also say that the previous comment around making a decision for our particular policy that doesn't coincide necessarily with entities that monitor us and hold us accountable for certain things sometimes can be not in our best interest. I'll just have to say it that way.
Well-
And I'm just going to say, in my 40-plus years in Baltimore City Public Schools, I'm including time before being on the board. This is a system that, in terms of accountability and the auditing of our processes, which do include our procurement, is one that if we do not follow the state requirements and/or city requirements, that it really has not been to our benefit. So I hear what you're saying, but I'm just giving the reality of our system.
No, what,
Let me try this. But that's because the requirements required you to do A, B, C. You recognize that it better not to do C. It was stupid. And so maybe you deviated from it. And the auditors, their only goal in life is to show that some executive branch official failed to comply with whatever the law was, so they can get, later on when they get your budget in front of you, they say, how come you didn't do it? But his point is much more adventurous. He doesn't come to the phenomenon of government and say, oh, it requires A, B, C, we better do that. He looks at each one of these and says, why are we doing C after all? And if he has a good reason, which he did, we came up with the MBE program, we thought, then you go and you talk to the people above and say, look, here's the story. But that requires a different attitude than, look, let's just do what we did last year. We didn't get in any trouble. That requires what he did, especially when we were younger, said, oh, no, we should do it a different way.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that you violate the law or policy. I'm suggesting that if you've got a better program and you want to support it, you go to the people who you think the conflicts with, and you seek their approval to do it. If they don't approve it, then so be it. You follow the law. You do what you have to do. But I could tell you, for example, on the city side, for many, many years, on the Department of Transportation contracts, most of which are funded through the state and which gets its money from the feds, the city has forever taken the position that if it's federal money, state money through the federal money coming through the state, that they have to apply the federal DBE requirements and state DBE, because there's no MBE law at the federal level, so it's DBE. But here's the problem. The Baltimore City Charter says that all contracts awarded by the Board of Estimates must apply the city MBE law. There is nothing in any grant agreement between the city and the state that says that the city is required to follow the state program. That's always been an assumption that's been made. And no one's ever tested it. No one's ever asked. No one's ever been to the state and said, hey, can we use it? Our charter, after all, says, and we're legally bound. I mean, you're the mayor and city council of Baltimore. Nobody's ever asked. So all I'm saying is, if you really believe in what you're doing, if you think it's right, at least ask the people who you believe have the control over you, that you're accountable to, at least ask them to do it the way that you think is best for your own people. That's all. All right?
Commissioner Lynn? So just a couple, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate you being here, appreciate the work that Mr. Smith, Mr. Vogel have gone through. Just a couple things to queue up for staff as they move this policy forward that have come up for me in this conversation. And one would be looking into the differences between using a pass-fail and a rubric, and how might implicit bias get masked by a pass-fail or a rubric. So just,
Okay.
to me, rubrics seem like they are due diligence, but I don't know, and we don't have the information. Also looking at, if we are requiring pre-bid meetings, is there a way to do them via webinar or podcast so they can be accessible when the potential provider is able to access them? One of the big, looking at if we are going to engage with consortium on any kind of regular basis, I know that various buying groups have different internal regulations on MWE. One in particular certainly isn't, I'm not endorsing this one, but I have sat down with their leadership and asked, and that's Buy Board. And they have requirements.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. That's who?
Buy Board, BUY, it's a consortium of boards across the country, and they have pretty strict MWE requirements as well. And then the last piece, and this is the reason that I asked to push pause on this policy a while ago, is back to what's sort of been talked about under the surface here, and that's we are this $1.2 billion industry in this community that needs love. And so how can we leverage our buying to receive, a 2% on every 1 million, or whatever the threshold is decided to be, give back or in return, whether they're in kind, whether it's cash, whether it's internships, externships, excess materials, leaning into our CTE programs to do dual enrollment with community college reciprocally dual enrolled in high schools. There's a lot of things. Right now, we don't have the capacity to manage that internally at North Avenue. So to start out with, I would suggest if we can make something work, that it's simply that you give us a check. And we could put that check directly to support pre-K education in lieu of Kerwin until that funding comes into place. Because as it's set right now, our pre-K comes out of our general funds, and it would be a way to help supplement.
Can I give you the answer to that one?
Wait, let me finish.
Or you want to keep going?
Yeah. Actually, we can chat offline about the answer to that one, because we're coming up on the end of our time, and I'd like to leave it as publicly available as an option. The conversation that I've previously keyed up with the drafters of this is sort of modeling it off of the Philadelphia 1% project. And the 1% project in Philadelphia all goes to public art, but we could certainly mirror that and put it towards the public good of educating children. So then my final thing is just, as a board, we have this fundamental fiduciary responsibility to spend as little money as possible and be in compliance with the requirements. But I also believe we have a fundamental fiduciary responsibility to be able to provide and deliver an exceptional education that prepares each student to be life ready and allows each employee to fulfill their job responsibilities with excellence. And that doesn't always mean cheapest or lowest dollar amount, but does mean doing the right thing for the right reasons to be as efficient and as effective as possible to allow us to live our vision and mission. Okay?
Let me offer one other point, and that is the procurement system has historically been there to procure products and services at the best value. But beginning about 100 years ago, the procurement systems in the Fed and the states began to get imposed upon to achieve socioeconomic goals with the expenditures. So, for example, Buy America. Well, okay, if you want to buy the cheapest steel, you may get it elsewhere, but Buy America is a preference. Another preference is the MBE program, and other ones like that. That's to blend just what you have intuited, which is that if you're going to be spending all this money, let's do it in a way that creates the most good for the most people. So that was one of the original motivations. This is 40 years ago for us. The other thing you could do is you could introduce another method of source selection. You don't have to have project delivery systems the way you have it the old way. That way, you can have a public-private partnership. So take a look at Prince George's County. It has a public-private partnership program where the concessionaire or the applicant comes up with the finance, design, build, maintain, and operate of the facility. Because the people like you who are drawn to this because of the love of education, chances are not drawn to this for the love of public-private partnership structures. I'm just guessing. So if you do that, it'll help you get more schools sooner, and then when you have the money one of these days, you can purchase the school back. That's an alternative.
Excellent. All right, well, with that, I appreciate everyone's attendance here tonight and your expertise. And again, to the crafters of this is a big deal, and so we really appreciate the time and intentionality you're putting towards it. Thank you, Dr. S., for making that be a possibility. So with that, the next policy committee meeting is Tuesday of this week, and at 3:30 in this room, so look forward to participation there. And at 6:58 p.m., we are adjourned.